There was a conscious decision in my life to be involved in something that was flowing and dynamic and living, something that had a life of its own, and I was just a part of it.
This is the Holy Grail here. This has never been seen. I don't know why.
What is it about the Grateful Dead?
Grateful Dead.
The narrative of the Grateful Dead was that we're the same as you. You're the same as us. There is no real distinction.
The camaraderie and the fellowship in that is so powerful.
Yeah, let's have some fun.
We were experimenting with psychedelics as much as we were playing music.
It's a philosophy of leaving yourself open to possibility and leaving yourself open to magic.
The acid test experience really formed the band as a group mind.
Within 30 minutes, I could find any drug that I want. Uh-oh. Are we being pulled?
Sound. That's the link between them and the audience.
We built the wall of sound with our own two hands.
It was like the voice of God.
If you weren't in the audience, you were included in the experience.
We should have known that something was coming when there were more people outside the show than there were inside.
There was a strong belief that it'd be leaderless.
Who was in charge? Well, I'm so glad you asked that. There were times when I was in charge, times when Jerry was in charge. A truck that had a blown carburetor, that carburetor was the boss.
It was total chaos.
Spinners would be out in the hall, and they'd be bowing because they thought Garcia was a problem.
Jerry Garcia did not bargain to be the mayor of a traveling countercultural town.
It was a machine by then. You know how many people are depending on this show going down the road? Where's the freedom in that?
It's not up to us to define the Grateful Dead. It's this living, breathing thing. I think that's one of the parts of its magic. Not defining it is that it becomes everything.
Give it up one more time for Amir Bar-Lev. And I'm going to tell you why you should give it up for him. It's not just because he made a documentary about the Grateful Dead. He made probably the definitive documentary about the Grateful Dead. I think it's about 4 hours and change long, right? Yeah. And it is worth watching for every minute of that.
Thanks.
I told you I put the screener on yesterday. I think I was going to try to watch it in parts, maybe. I sat down, I watched the whole thing. It flows beautifully. It's got an incredible rhythm of its own. It's a wonderful piece of filmmaking. Congratulations.
Saying that, yeah. You know, people get scared off by the 4-hour length, but I like to think that it doesn't have a lot of fat. You know, it doesn't have any fat. We worked on it for about 3 years editing it. So, and I have a fantastic team of fans like myself, but also a lot of non-fans to make sure that you know it works for diehards. But really, the intended audience are people who have always scratched their head and wondered what's so interesting about this band and why is everybody in love with it.
And I told you backstage, I am not a diehard, unlike this man who's sitting right here and looks like a diehard, if you want to turn the camera on his shirt. I've always liked the Grateful Dead, but I loved watching the film. Let's talk about where it first began. It's executive produced by Martin Scorsese, right? That's
right.
Did it begin with him, or did you start it and then bring it to him? How did the whole project start?
No, it was my idea a long time ago. It actually took, from the very beginning of trying to make this, it took 14 years. I found the email that I sent to them back in 2003.
Sent to who?
To the Grateful Dead organization. The thing that about the Grateful Dead is they're notoriously slow at making decisions.
14 years slow?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, you could look at it as 50 years slow. I mean, this film has been, you know, it's a long time in coming. Somebody was going to try and make this, and many people came before me and tried to do it because they have a great story. You know, it's got everything you want in a rock and roll story. It's got, you know, bad behavior, sex, drugs, rock and roll. But it also is a great American story about big American dreams. And it's not a 60s story. It's a story that spans, you know, 30 years. So I'm not the first guy who wanted to make this film, but the Grateful Dead don't give a hoot about publicity. that's one of the things that's interesting about them, is that they've never really sought out publicity. In fact, one of the pieces of archival footage that we found in their vault was sort of the carcass on the side of the road of one of the documentary crews that came before us. They got dosed with LSD so that they couldn't finish what they were doing, and ended up filming themselves instead of the band, and it's pretty amazing footage.
And many said, and many people who were there said that was Jerry actually sabotaging them, right? Like,
yeah, I think they, what was one of the things that was remarkable about this band is they had a healthy mistrust for celebrity. They didn't want to be rock stars in the normal way. And it's funny, in the film, the guy who's telling that story says, Janis and Jimmy had just gotten their own documentary, and, it was time for the Grateful Dead to get theirs. This is back in 1970. And, Janis and Jimmy are no longer with us and died, not long thereafter. I think they correctly saw that mega stardom was not a road to longevity. And so they didn't seek out a documentary, just like they didn't seek out many of the trappings of stardom.
Now, you say that their story contains lots of sex and drugs, and we even just mentioned one, but I didn't find the movie to be indulgent in any way of these sort of cliches of rock stardom and this period of time, and of what you would expect of the culture surrounding the Grateful Dead.
I appreciate you saying that. I think I tend to highlight the sex and drugs just because I'm like a carnival barker.
Sells.
But you could, yeah, it sells.
There is sex and drugs.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah, don't worry. No, of course, the things that interest me are not the more prurient stuff, but the big ideas. And they were a unique band. They never came on stage with a set list. They didn't put together a kind of a performance, a showbiz performance for their audience. They improvised on stage. So every show was different. They did something like 2,500 shows in the course of 30 years, and not one of them was the same as another. And because they got up and without a lot of stage patter or smoke bombs or lasers, they got up and gave an honest show for their audience. It invited people to keep coming back over and over again, because you never know what was going to happen. Sometimes they'd have a great night, sometimes they'd have a less than great night. It was almost like being a sports fan in a way, where the part of the enjoyment isn't that your team is going to win. It's that something unexpected might happen. So they were unique and also extraordinarily generous. They created a kind of a collective. It was more like a kibbutz than a rock band on a level, and so they paid their employees a ton of money. They were, in the 70s, it was said that the roadies ran the band, Jerry was this extremely charismatic guy who people wanted to elevate to rock star status, but he was too smart and too humble for that kind of thing, and he didn't want to lead this collective. He just wanted to let people do what they wanted to do, and kind of have everybody take responsibility for it, which invited a lot of anarchy and chaos, but also made it a pretty interesting ride. And so, yeah, there's a lot of sex and drugs, but I'm coming back to it. Yeah, no, but it's all a part of this sort of anarchist utopian story, which I think anybody who has a streak of anti-authoritarianism is going to be interested in.
You kind of touched on it, but what I really loved about the film is how the Grateful Dead, and I think this is just my interpretation, becomes a sort of greater metaphor for the subculture being consumed by the system and the machine itself, specifically after the 70s, and you roll into Reagan's 80s, and then you roll into the 90s. Was that something that you found while crafting the film, or something that you already maybe felt about what happened to sort of the hippie subculture, hippie for lack of a better word?
Well, there's a great line in the film. Somebody says, that's how the mainstream deals with threats to it. They kind of love you to death, and I think
consume you in a culture of consumption. You get consumed.
I think you don't have to follow what happens to the Grateful Dead to understand that. I feel like these days, especially, any counterculture or subculture becomes co-opted and commodified and then sold back to you. So I think that happened to punk and skateboarding and surfing.
Within a month, Pepsi had a resistance ad.
Exactly, right? So, I mean, I think the Grateful Dead, to their great credit, resisted that for a very long time and did represent something subversive, and then yeah, probably to deal with that threat, Jerry was turned into a kind of a Captain Trips, happy hippie Santa Claus figure, which would do no harm to anybody. And part of what we saw as our goal or job in making the film was to, polish the myth of Jerry and polish the Grateful Dead and burnish it and make it dangerous again, as I think it deserves to be.
Did you worry that sort of making the myth dangerous once again would sort of glorify the myth even more, or sort of add more fuel to that fire?
I mean, I think the Grateful Dead made their own rules and rewrote the rules of the music business, and I think culturally they were something special and something I would say with a vital message, especially today. I feel like I made the film as a parent as much as a fan. I am a fan, but I also I have 3 kids. They're too young to really be interested in rock and roll yet. But I felt like I'd rather my kids go to Grateful Dead concerts than get consumed with social media and just constantly looking into their phones in the way that I worry teenagers do too much today. Yeah. So I think that there's a vital message that the Grateful Dead, and it has to do with being in the present, being yourself, being authentic. All these things that we all try to do as teenagers, but it seems to be getting harder these days when everybody's composing things for one another. I went to a Roger Waters concert last night, which was amazing.
Phones,
phones. Yeah, exactly. Everybody had their phone up, and I'm thinking, we're only going to be here for a couple hours. Whatever you're taking with your hand is not going to be worth. Are you really going to sit and watch it later?
It's also just shitty because it's in my way.
Yeah, and suddenly I'm looking at a bunch of. Can we say shitty?
Yeah. We can say
good. Okay. Right. Yeah. So it was totally shitty, and
like there's this symbolic problem with it culturally, but then there's also just like
just the
you're
basic.
You're
fact of
blocking
it.
my view because you're trying to record something that you're never going to watch again.
Yeah, Grateful Dead concerts. Obviously, most of them happened before we had these little annoying, shitty phones. But also, it was a place where you interacted with. There was probably less sort of stargazing at the stage and more of interacting with the people around you, which is fun and unique. And I tried to get to my seat last night, and this guy got all angry at me because he was busy taking a shot with his phone. And it's like, come on, man. It used to be you'd go to a concert and you'd like buy beers for the people around you or whatever.
How angry did you get? How much did you have to?
Well, he was a
sort of
huge guy, so I didn't. Yeah. But also at the show last night, and this is not to throw Roger Waters, who's one of my absolute favorite musicians, under the bus, but the guitar solo was exactly the guitar solo from the album, and that's and I happen to know that Roger Waters has been on tour for like 5 years now or something. I felt sorry for the guitar player. I mean, he's got to do that same guitar solo the same way, night in, night out, night in, night out. And even as an audience member, it's less entertaining than what the Grateful Dead delivered to us, because as soon as they figured out the right way to play a guitar solo, Jerry would never do it that way again, because he felt there's a big difference between music and theater. A theater is should be the same every night. It should be scripted, and it should be as good as it possibly can. You sit at home and you write the script and you get it right, and then it gets workshopped and then it gets perfected, and there it is. That's the script for theater. Music is something different. Music should be on some level, it should be improvised. It should be It should be played in the same way sports is played. Like, we just don't know what's going to happen, which means sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not going to work. But it feels honest and authentic that way. And I even as a teenager, seeing them in the '80s, they kind of ruined other bands for me. Because you'd go and you go, he's saying hello Cleveland, but he said it, he said hello New York in the visit to the last show. That stage pattern stuff was never part of the Grateful Dead, which is what makes them unique.
Take me back to outlining the movie, right? Did you have a general idea for what the sort of scope was going to be for the film, and then you started finding footage and building in, sort of putting the puzzles in place? Or did you sort of just get all of the footage and then find your story that way?
Well, so there's 2 parts to a documentary usually, or maybe more, but there's the interviews you do, obviously, and then there's the archive. We
But you only shot, like, I mean, how many interviews did you shoot?
There's 17 interviews, actually, yeah. I mean, so, you know, we saw that we were making something that we wanted it to be a good film, first and foremost. And like I said earlier, you know, we were really aiming the film at non-fans more than fans. We wanted it to work for fans, but we felt like it had to work as a piece of cinema, first and foremost. So, you know, you are what you eat. We consumed great characters, and we didn't really care too much if we got the road manager who, you know, was with them for the longest period of time. We got the road manager who's living in his van right now still, you know, as a 70-year-old.
Sounds like Michael Caine when he talks.
Right, yeah, right. So that's Sam Cutler, who's a terrific, he looks like he just walked in off the new Pirates of the Caribbean. You know, he's got a beautiful rock and roll face. He's a great storyteller, and he is a perfect documentary character, and maybe not the person you'd feature for a long period of the Wikipedia entry, but we weren't making history. We were trying to make a good piece of film. We were trying to make a great rock and roll documentary and tell a great rock and roll story. And then the archival, you know, because nobody else, like I said, they're incredibly slow at making decisions. Nobody had made this film, obviously, so 40 years worth of amazing home movies and things like that accrued in their vault, and then they opened up that vault to us. So we were the first people to see all this stuff, and
From the
okay,
vault.
lots of bad behavior. I know I said it earlier, but you know, there's a lot of fun stuff that, you know, you've seen actors party in the 70s, but this is like the real thing. There were great people, you know, great New York-based documentary crews who got some of their work done before they too were felled by heavy secret doses of psychedelics. But before they did, they captured, like, you know, it's like Almost Famous or Boogie Nights or something like that. You can't believe what you're watching. It's fun.
How did you avoid the trappings of the sort of standard rock doc cliches? Because one of the things that I loved about the film is that there are the moments where it could easily head there, or it's starting to head there, and you knew how to just sort of tweak it enough so that it felt fresh. I think, for instance, the footage that you have of them on, I think, on their European tour, and a lot of the interviews start saying the booze and the coke started kicking in at this point, and it became a little more dark and sinister, which is the standard story for like a lot of rock bands in the 70s.
Well, because we're all huge music heads, you know, and so we never wanted to get behind the music. We just want to stay with the music. And, you know, I think anybody who loves music has a challenge with a documentary film, right? Because music is like food or something. It's hard to describe it, you know, and you can easily just want to say, well, just I can't, you just eat it, you know, I can't. But there are people who are great at describing experiences. But it involves sort of enacting the thing, right? So, like, if you wanted to have a movie about sex, it has to be a sexy movie. But a lot of times with music docs, it's just like you have a bunch of people saying, this music was amazing, trust me, you know? And that, I think, is a really crappy way of going about, you know, filmmaking. So we...
Like 5 critics being like, they were the best at their time.
Yeah, right. I remember when this album dropped. You know, it's like saying, trust me, this guy's really funny. If you're making a movie about a comedian, you know, it's like you got to laugh. You actually have to make the audience laugh. Or in the case of a music film, make them feel music. And so, you know, we have an incredible team of filmmakers who we've developed a kind of an editing approach that I hope hasn't ever been seen before. I don't think I've seen it before, and it's musical in its nature, and it's kind of psychedelic too. It's like it kind of swirls back on itself as you indicate. You know, it's like you feel like you're watching music, and then, you know, there's also a lot going on. Like you know, times we thought people's attention span has regrettably gotten shorter, but it's also gotten like faster, right? So, you know, you could, like the Family Guy or whatever can get, you know, reminds me of the time, and then it goes off in this side tangent and then whips back. We do stuff like that because you feel like the audience now can take that on board.
Did Scorsese have anything to do with that idea of tangents? I know that, like, one of my favorite quotes of his is always like, the best part about filmmaking is see how far you can go on a tangent before you have to pull the story back.
That's great. Hearing you say that, I of course see that in his films.
But I think the best one.
Right.
Wolf of Wall Street is mostly a tangent.
Oh, that's right. It's like
it.
tangent upon tangent upon tangent. Yeah. That's. I mean, we looked to all our favorite filmmakers for guidance, and one of our editors works for Terrence Malick. So there's a kind of he
definitely a tangential nature.
Yeah. And he said to me at one point, what Terrence will do is when you get the film working just right, he just wants to smudge it. Like you would smudge a canvas so that it's not working just right. And everything's sort of piled up on top of itself in the wrong way. But that's what makes it beautiful and impressionistic and musical, really. So we did that. We stole that from him.
I heard one time, this is a tangent, he did a cut of The New World only listening to Green Day's American Idiot for some reason. Terrence Malick.
Cool. Yeah.
I don't know if that's true. Someone told me that, and I was like, that sounds weird enough to maybe be true. What were you most shocked to learn about the Grateful Dead or Garcia in the process of making this 3-4 year process of putting the film together?
I mean, one of the things we had to reckon with is whether or not there should be a documentary about the Grateful Dead. There's a great moment in an interview with Jerry where he says, he comes out of left field. He says, I figure if I succeed as an artist, I'll have built something that can't be torn down after I'm gone. And you kind of think he's going to say, and that's what I'm trying to do. But he says the opposite. He after a pregnant pause, he says, I don't want that. I think I'd rather have fun. And he goes on to explain that what he loved about being in the band was that they were constantly reinventing themselves, and that they, when they figured out how to do something, they wouldn't do it that way again, and they were constantly changing their sound and evolving. And I think he worried that when they weren't around to evolve, when he wasn't around to evolve anymore, that it would kind of freeze into, a monument of itself. And
you have that great moment of him where he's asked, has the Grateful Dead gotten too big, right?
Yeah.
He says, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, fame is a thing that does that, right? You after a while, when we go to see Roger Waters or whatever, we go get beers during his new songs or whatever, and that's a way of freezing people and turning them into monuments. And Jerry and the whole band was pretty great at resisting that. And I would say that the fans, too, were pretty great at allowing them to evolve. But I think it's one of the reasons why they dosed that camera crew, those documentary crews, was they weren't interested in having people scrutinize them and then kind of pin them down as being one thing. Because, the Grateful Dead were a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we tried to make a film that honored that. And it was a challenge.
Now, I have to ask this is going back, and I probably should have asked this a few minutes ago when you said it, but 14 years ago when you sent an email to the Grateful Dead organization, what was your pitch?
That's a good question.
Detailed was your pitch.
Yeah. It was detailed, and it was after a while I made a proposal, and I was like, this is how you would do this film, And then they said, well, there's a few things we don't like about that. And so then I said, oh, sorry. This is how you would do the film. So I constantly, I didn't want to take no for an answer. So I actually proposed several different films. And then, we got it to a place, and it took 11 years to get to this place, but I have to acknowledge my partners in this, Eric Eisner and Alex Blavatnik, and the rest of our producing team, really kind of like muscled them into place where we had control, and it was no longer about that's hard with rock stars, is to get them to a place where it silences the people around them and that side of themselves that wants to control their image. But to their credit, we were able to structure a deal so that we could make the film we wanted to make, and then I didn't have to run ideas by them anymore.
How have they responded to, the people involved with the Grateful Dead organization, how have they responded to the film?
Well, yeah, they came to Sundance with us, and I was just, they're extremely, for mega rock stars, they're extremely accessible. I was at a screening in Mill Valley that was 10 minutes from Bob Weir's house. Yes,
I've interviewed
last
Bob
week.
Weir. He's a really nice guy.
Yeah.
He's like not
Yeah.
rock star like at all.
No, I'll tell you a story. So anyway, so last week I was during the screening. It's such a long film that you can like go watch somebody else's film at a film festival and then come back and do your Q&A. And in this case, I said, God, this is a pity. I'm 10 minutes from Weir's house. So I drove up the hill and I asked him if he wanted to join me at the Q&A, and then he did, just on the spur of the moment, you know. So yeah, they're a game, and there's a bunch of scenes in the film where we do things like that with Weir. If you catch him at the right moment, he'll do whatever with you, you know, like. So that's part of the story.
Do whatever with you. Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a scene. So you know, the Grateful Dead. Your audience may or may not know that most of their music was written by their lyricists who weren't on stage with them, but were parts of the band, you know, offstage members of the band. And one of their lyricists,
many members of the band.
Yes, yeah. So Robert Hunter is their lyricist. He's notoriously reclusive, and he was the white whale that we were unable to get to commit to an interview over the many years we were trying to make this. And so I was interviewing Bob Weir, and he was saying, yeah, he's notoriously reclusive. And then as a kind of an aside, he says, you know, I could text him or call him and see if maybe he'd do it, you know, for me. And I said, okay, he's playing tonight, you know. And so we got it right there, and it's in the film. And we kept all the footage. He just jumps in his car, and we ambush Robert Hunter. But I'll tell you a story about how cool Bob Weir is. We had a production assistant on the crew. See, Bob Weir is like when he meets people, he does not act like a star at all. He like, you know, somebody's laying down cables here or whatever. He's like, oh, what's your name? And you know, he's just extremely down to earth. And this is a story less about this person who I don't mean to throw her under the bus, but more just about celebrity culture. And anyway, we're you know, it's a little bit awkward when you're setting up for a documentary because you go into somebody's house and then you just destroy the house. You know, you're like hanging lights everywhere. I always find that's one of the toughest parts of filmmaking for me is like, oh, sorry, we're just gonna move this vase, you know, and all this stuff. And while all that's happening, this local PA goes up to Bob Weir and goes, oh my God, and she starts to cry. She's like, I can't believe I'm meeting you. You know, it's just such an honor. And I took her aside and said, like, hey, don't ever do that. That's not what we're doing here. You know, this guy's let us into his house, and we got to be professionals. And you know, this isn't a time to treat him like a star and ask for an autograph or something like that. And she goes to somebody else on my team and says, I'm so embarrassed that I did that, and I don't even know who this guy is. She says about Bob Weir. It was just so weird, you know? It's just like she found out he was a rock star and decided to say, like, it's just amazing. I can't believe I'm actually meeting you. It's just like, that was what was really great about the Grateful Dead was, you know, they really didn't want us to treat them that way, you know? And that's refreshing in this day and age, you know? Yeah.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Who has a question right here?
Hey, thanks. I got to say first that I did see the movie in its entirety, and it's fantastically done. And I want to add that if anyone here or out there wants to see it, go see it in a movie theater.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Don't wait for home. I love you, Amazon, but go see it on the big screen with the real good sound system. Trust me. It's well worth it. I have a hard question to ask you, and I hope that I'm not throwing you under the bus.
Yeah.
Why is there no mention of Bill Graham in this movie?
Oh, yeah. Well, I ask myself that sometimes, too. I could name I won't, but I could name 4 or 5 things that the movie doesn't do. And you know, there's many of my favorite songs aren't in the movie, which is kind of crazy. But the goal was to make to get through 40 years and keep the audience. And sometimes there were things that were like really important, but sort of didn't have enough story to them, or some other, or the story wanted to be focused on something else at that point. You know, so we found that Bill Graham just kept trying to get him into the story, and the story kept pushing him out. And these things have this sort of organic nature where, you know, you just have to, it's like telling a story at a dinner table. You know, if you're trying to keep your audience captive, you know, you can't tell the story exactly how it happened. You have to tell it with a good arc. So that's why Bill Graham isn't in the story, and I'm sorry, Bill Graham, because as a Bay Area music fan, you gave me a lot of happiness, but hopefully he'll understand. Thanks for saying that about seeing it in the theaters. The film, we spent like 6 months on the sound mix. And yeah, it's a great thing to watch at home, but if you want to hear the sound mix the way we labored over it, we actually, unbeknownst to the band, when we went to the vault, we smuggled out their multi-tracks, and which most musicians would never want you to have, and probably they still aren't happy we took. But we basically took their songs and then sent them out to a 7.1 mix, which is a technical way of saying that, like, if you see it in the theater, you feel immersed in the music, it's amazing, really, because there's a little more guitar over there and a little more, drums over here, and if you see it at home, you won't get that experience. But yeah.
Got it. Next
May
question.
20. Oh, sorry, I should say May. Thank you. Yeah, May 25th. It's going to be showing at 50 theaters, throughout the country. Sex and drugs.
And the soundtrack comes
Come
out
on
one
in.
of those days too, right? The soundtrack comes out that day as well?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not doing my
Doing it.
job
We're
here.
doing
Yeah, right.
it.
Okay. And there's a soundtrack, which has the music from the film, and is not missing my favorite songs, despite what I might have just said. Yeah.
Is there like a section of the soundtrack that's just it says your favorite songs?
Yeah, I mean it's great, and it's for fans and the uninitiated too.
Next question.
So you were talking about the editing. Hi. You were talking about the editing process a little bit. Considering all the footage that you had access to and all the interviews you did, was it hard to even get it to 4 hours? And how did you ultimately decide what to cut and what to keep?
Yeah.
Good question.
Thanks. Thanks for asking that. Yeah, I mean, what we did was we took that Family Guy approach, so we just like moved the thing really quickly, and so I actually think of it more as an 8-hour film. It's 4 hours for fans, 4 hours for non-fans, and they're smushed on top of each other. So that like fans are watching one thing and non-fans are enjoying a different thing, but it's all happening really quickly. And oftentimes people are talking over each other, like the way you hear on like Radiolab, like podcasts do this sometimes, but it really works for a documentary. And the other thing we did, I have an animator named Stefan Nadelman who I told him I want the film to be very, very trippy, but not to look trippy at all, And I didn't.
So corny, right?
I didn't want corny.
Yeah,
I didn't want anything corny. It's hard to do that, and most people, I would say, fall short by putting a lot of like trails and stupid stuff like that. So I told him, I think the way to do trippy is to have so much happening that it's like overwhelming. And so we went to photographers. We went to like all the great rock photographers that have documented them over decades, and normally when you go to a photographer for a documentary, you pay them by the photo. But I said I want the iconic photo, and then I want like the 4 you took right before that, and then the 2 afterwards. Just give us everything you ever took of the band and tell us what that would cost. And we basically did these buyout deals with a lot of the photographers, and we got their contact sheets and stuff. And so there's just like an attack on your retina that happens with the film that I'm really proud of.
You also, I think, basically utilize like every tool there is possible when it comes to B-roll and photography in terms of like editing techniques and framing them, which I thought was like very smart. You're making a 4-hour documentary, and use everything we got.
Thanks. Yeah, and trying to be musical. Like the Grateful Dead were amazing in the sense that they would all be soloing at the same time, and we felt like we should do that with the film, is make it feel like music. So I like to think that we've carved. My team has carved some new territory in the music doc world.
I think you absolutely have. It's a wonderful film, Amir. Congratulations.
Thanks so much for having me.
When it comes out May 25th, people can see it?
It's going to be in theaters on May 25th, and then it'll be in New York and Los Angeles beginning the 26th through the 1st, and then June 2nd, it's going to be on Amazon Prime. And you can find out if it's playing near you by going to our website and checking on Facebook. It's got a list of all the theaters.
It's a wonderful film, a
Thanks.
masterful job. Amir Bar-Lev,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks.